Christopher Columbus's first journey to the New World in 1492 was unquestionably one of the most important events in all of human history. The immediate effects of the collision between these two worlds would alter the course of the human species all over the globe for centuries to come. In the last video, we learned about the origins of Columbus's journey. We asked the question, why 1492? What was so different about the world in 1492 that allowed Columbus to claim success, where others before him, like the Vikings, had failed? In this video, we will be learning about the impact of Columbus's voyages. We will be asking the big question, what is the Columbian Exchange, and what effect did it have on peoples all over the world, especially people in Europe and the Americas? Answering this first question will inevitably lead us to a second big question. How should Christopher Columbus be remembered? Was he a bold and inspirational hero, or an evil and deceitful villain? Before 1492, the world was basically divided in half. The Old World, in the Eastern Hemisphere, included the continents of Europe, Asia, and Africa. The New World, in the Western Hemisphere, was made up of North and South America. The Old and New World were two very different places. They had different plants, animals, natural resources, and diseases. Their cultures, ideas, and technologies were also very different. Columbus's voyages, starting in 1492, brought these two worlds together in meaningful contact for the first time. Starting in 1492, there was an exchange of plants, animals, resources, diseases, peoples, ideas, and cultures between the Old and New Worlds. This interchange is known as the Columbian Exchange. Now let's look at some specific examples to better understand how different the world was before 1492. Let's start by looking at plants. Before 1492, plants grown in the New World by Native Americans included corn, potatoes, tobacco, tomatoes, and coca, which is used to make chocolate. None of these plants grew in the Old World. Instead, the Old World had its own plants. These plants included rice, wheat, coffee, bananas, and oranges. The domesticated animals in both worlds were also very different. The Native Americans had domesticated just two animals, turkey and llama. That's it. The Old World was blessed when it came to domesticated animals. Europe, Asia, and Africa had horses, cows, pigs, and sheep. Here is a diagram showing what the plant and animal world looked like before 1492. Now take a good look, because I'm going to give you a quick test. And what I want you to do is to pretend that you are at a grocery store sometime before 1492. Which of these products could you have bought? Sorry, there were no potatoes in Ireland. There was no beef in Texas. There was no chocolate in Switzerland. There were no bananas in South America. There were no oranges in Florida. And no coffee in Colombia. None of these products, which we associate with all of these places today, existed before 1492. And if we ordered some pizza or pasta in Italy, it would look very different. There were no tomatoes in Europe. After 1492, everything changed. On his second voyage, Columbus introduced horses, cattle, and pigs to the New World. He brought back to Europe corn and other New World plants. It was only a matter of time before all of these plants and animals would be exchanged. Following the Columbian Exchange, global patterns of trade would be forever altered. New foods reshaped the diets of many people throughout the world. So it sounds like the Columbian Exchange was a good thing, right? I mean, what would spaghetti and pizza be without tomato sauce? Unfortunately for the Native Americans, the Europeans brought with them more than just plants and animals to the New World. They also brought death and disease. For generations, Europeans had built up immunities to diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza. The Native Americans had no natural immunities and were no match for these microscopic killers. An estimated 75% to 90% of the Indian population in North America were killed by infectious diseases in the centuries following the Columbian Exchange. How does that compare to other population disasters in history? In the Holocaust, an estimated 6 million Jews were killed. This was about 75% of the Jewish population in Europe. The bubonic plague, known as the Black Death, which swept through Europe in the 14th century, wiped out an estimated 25 million people, around 40% of the population of Europe. 30% of the population of Europe. The outbreak of epidemics among Native American peoples killed 30 million people, an estimated 30 million people. Far, far more Native Americans would die in a bed than on a battlefield. The decimation of the Native Americans tribes following the arrival of Europeans was arguably the greatest population disaster in the history of the world. Some historians have compared the death of millions of Native Americans to the death of the Jews in the Holocaust. Is this a fair comparison? How are these two events similar, and how are they different? In the centuries after 1492, there was a dramatic shift in population. This graph shows the steady decline in the population of the Native Americans in North America. In their place, Europeans started pouring into the New World, establishing colonies. From Peru to Canada, diseases had reduced the resistance that Native Americans were able to mount against these European invaders. The impact of Columbus's actions would be felt by people worldwide. But how should Christopher Columbus be remembered? Was he a hero, like Batman? Or was he a villain, like the Joker? Historians who argue Columbus is a hero point out that he, first, spread the benefits of Western civilization to primitive Native American peoples. They argue that Columbus should be praised for bravery, determination, and his skill as a mariner. They point out that Columbus should not be punished for the bad acts of later Spanish conquistadors, which we'll learn about in a later video. They argue that any violence he may have committed towards Native Americans was only committed in self-defense, that Columbus and his men acted violently in reaction to Native American aggression. Finally, they point out that the deadly diseases Columbus first brought to the New World were transmitted inadvertently. They contend that the tragedy that resulted from the transmission of these diseases was inevitable. Other historians argue that Christopher Columbus was an evil villain. They point out that Columbus brought diseases to the Americans that resulted in the death of millions of Native Americans. They argue that Columbus committed brutal and oppressive acts of violence against natives. Stories of Spanish cruelty include killing Native Americans to feed Spanish dogs, and Spanish chopping off the hands of Native Americans who failed to bring them gold. Historians also point out that Columbus initiated the Atlantic slave trade by bringing the first Indian slaves back with him to Europe. They also argued that Columbus established a precedent for Europeans simply taking Native American land by force. Finally, they argue that Columbus should not be given credit for discovering the New World because, for one, it had already been discovered by Native Americans and even other non-natives, and two, Columbus' discovery was the result of sheer luck and stupidity. He was simply wrong about the location of Asia. One thing we can all agree is that Columbus remains to this day a very polarizing person. Hopefully this video has helped you answer these two big questions. And following up on the last big question, why 1492? And then the first question in this video, what is the Columbian Exchange and what effects did it have on the peoples of Europe and the Americas? And second, how should Christopher Columbus be remembered? As always, thanks for watching.